we'll go over multiple flare tips and tricks, things to think about, and certain nuances and patterns. So let's just watch these flares right here. So the way I like to look at flares in general is I like to divide everything in half. So I guess I'll just draw it out right here. So most people will see flare as a V in the front like this. And if I play it, you have this V in the front. Wow. It's almost in line, but not quite. Anyways, everyone notices the flare as a V in the front or a V in the back, right? So this V right here. But important thing to note when I think about flares is not to worry so much about flares as a V as much as it is on as an L, I guess. And I'll get into that. I'll explain what I mean in a second. So I like to divide my thought process on flares by two sections. So straight down the middle. So everything that goes on this side of the flare, let's focus on just that for now. And this is already if you have multiple flares. If you have, if you're trying to get one flare, or if you're trying to get a few multiple flares, that may be a little bit before you get to this point. But if you have multiple flares already, or if you're trying to get multiple flares, this could be something you think about as well. But yeah, let's look at this portion of the flare right now. All right, only this side. Continuing it, and I like to divide it in half because you have two portions. You have this L right here, right? Oops, you know what? I'm just gonna draw it like this, following the legs. And I'm actually gonna make it yellow. So my legs, you have this L right here, and it's like a backwards L. But this L is gonna lead me into my next V. So if this L is good, that means my V in the back, I guess V is what you call it. Oh, whoops. That means this right here is good. If you have a very bad L, and let's say your leg is low or this leg's not high enough, then you won't have a good back V in your flare. Now let's look at the other side. Same thing. This dividing line, let's go back a little bit actually. Yeah, so this is fine. All right, so this L right here, and this leg coming, oh, that's bad, around the front. This L, if this one is good, it'll give you a good V in the front, if that makes sense. So I like to look at my flare in halves. Let's see. Yeah, so if this is good, you get a good V as a result. If this is good, you get a good V as a result. So always, and that's why I like to think about my flares as L's and V's, or L's, I guess, or in half. Because like unlike most power moves, you have a leading leg and a kicking leg, but for flares, you're constantly switching. So for example, this leg right here, this is the leg that's going to keep you up as this leg swings around, right? But the roles of the legs change as soon as this leg comes up and reaches, I'll assume, this point. So once this leg reaches this point right here, that's when the roles switch. So if I keep, let's see. As soon as this leg comes up here to this point, now this leg is swinging back. So every time you reach the halfway point, or like you look at the flares as halves, your legs are switching roles, if that makes sense. if you think about windmill, or if you think about air track, or if you think about like literally anything else, you have a leading leg and a kicking leg. And if I go back here, so for example, this leg right here that's low would be my kicking leg, right? All the power is coming from this leg. And this leg that's coming up would be my leading leg, right? So let's see. This one's my leading leg. This one's my kicking leg. It's kicking. All my power is generated from this leg. As this comes up and it reaches this point, this leg now switches to my leading leg, while this leg now becomes the kicking leg as it kicks back. So every time you reach that halfway point, you switch roles. So this leg, the role is to keep you up and pull it in to give you the height. This one will be kicking you forward. Now this leg switches into its new responsibilities to keep you up as the other leg switches through or kicks through. But yeah, exactly. In terms of kicking, the way your legs kick, it is a symmetrical move. But yeah, unlike power moves, I guess for power moves, if you look at it like just from a top-down view, it does look symmetrical. But as far as like a thought process goes, the role that your legs play in all of this is it's not that. This is what makes it different, because your legs constantly have to be switching on and off on certain roles. So yes, you want these L's for flares, exactly. The ideal height, with the leg lower to the floor, I guess like slightly below your hips or lower if you want. It doesn't. There's no rule for it. But I would just try and keep it in the same line, I guess, if that makes sense. Like if, for example, let's use this first video as an example. So like notice like I'm starting this flare off, and I'll do it by frame. I'm starting this flare off, and this first kicking leg, it starts off like low, comes up high, and then dips back low, right? So as long as you're consistent with it, like, so this is bad. Like this is a bad example. Like I start low, come up high. I'll just draw it out. I start low in the back, come around, pick up high, and then it drops low again. And maybe I'll go back. So this leg starts low, picks up high, and then sinks back low. So this is not a good example, right? But for this, as long as you maintain that same height right here, and for this, like, you know, it's not like as low as you can until you're barely dragging, or like, oh, hip length. It's as really like as long as you stay consistent with it. That's like the most important thing. Like notice with this leg right here, as soon as it kicks through and I make this L shape right here, this foot will stay relatively close along that line until it has to come up. And then this leg will come through and maintain like more or less the same height. It's not too much of a difference between these two heights. So basically what I'm saying is, as long as you're consistent with it, that's really like the most important thing. But I would say a definitive answer, which is really generic, but do what's comfortable for you. So there's no real like ideal height, but I would always keep track of my flares in the L's, because the V's kind of throw off like the true height of which you're supposed to be kicking, because the leg that's up is not really kicking. So like this leg isn't really kicking until I reach that halfway mark. Now it kicks, if that makes sense. All right, so people ask me, how do I get high in the back? And then how do I get high in the front, right? So it's two different things, but same answer for both. And the answer is the L's, right? So, and I'll get more into it. So if you have this L right here, I'm pulling this leg in as much as I can, right? And this picks up my hips higher. So the further I pull this leg like over and up and hold it there, the higher up I can lift my hips, if that makes sense. So this leg is essentially like anchoring me all the way through, right? And the higher you have this leg, honestly, the better. And not only the higher you have it, but the longer you can keep it up there, the better. So I'll show you what I mean. Let me go back. So this video right here, notice this leg right here. And I'll switch colors. Notice this leg right here. As I'm doing this, I get high with this leg, but immediately drops straight down, right? So the goal to keep your hips high, and notice when I do this flair, my hips are still high in the flair, but I don't maintain it simply because I'm not keeping this leg high. It's dropping straight down. So the height of your hips is contingent on the height of that, or how long you can keep that top leg up. All right, so now back to this slow motion video. So if you watch it, whatever leg is high, I keep it there as long as I can. I'll get into how to keep it up there in a second. But I keep this leg up here as long as I can until I'm in the back. Here, come forward, keep this leg up as high as I can, as long as I can. And then switch, keep this leg as high as I can. Switch, keep this leg here up as high as I can for as long as I can until I get to that halfway point. So how do you do that? You start off your flair. And so like, let's say you first kick, I'm not going to count that first jump. I'll do it from going back to the back of the flair. So let's say you reach this first V right here and your leg is up here. So I'll switch to a different color. Let's go with yellow. So your leg is up here. Notice that my toes are pointing straight back towards the mirror, right? When I end the sequence, by the time I finish this L and get to the back V, notice my toes are now pointing forward as I'm doing this. So my leg is still equally as high as it was before, but now instead my toes are pointing forward. And that's a really bad representation, but you guys know what I mean. So like more or less the same height, but my toes are pointing forward. So again, you're doing the flair, you make the V, this leg comes up, toes are pointing backwards, and notice as I'm doing this, as this leg comes back, when I make this L, making this L is going to cause me to rotate my foot, and it's so hard to explain, rotate my foot from facing backwards to facing sideways, and now facing the front, if that makes sense. So what's going to keep my leg up is if I have my foot facing back, and as I rotate the flair, as I kick back with that leg, it's going to like rotate around, if that makes sense. And if you guys watch me right here, like if my leg starts with my foot like facing the back wall, it's going to rotate back and face you guys. I really do have a hard time explaining this, but it's such an important concept. So you're back here, this leg rotates and it faces forward. So you're going to have a hip motion where like you're pivoting almost, or like you're like rotating your hip. Does that make sense? And same thing for the front. So I'll play the slow motion and then for the front. So conversely for this one, for this side, my toes are pointing forward, right, towards the camera. And then watch, as I make this L, toes are pointing sideways. And by the time I make this V, my toes are pointing backwards. So I'm keeping this leg up, by rotating my hips, if that makes sense. Whenever you're doing flair, you think about the... Yes, the only thing I'm thinking about if I'm trying to like consistently practice my flares is the L. So like most people will look at a flair and see the V in the front or the back and they're like, oh, what a clean flair. But really, if I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about the L, because if I don't have a good L, then I can't make a good V. And conversely, if you get a good L, you can make a good V. So the V's are only a product of a good L position. So notice I keep this leg up and this hip rotates. So I'll play it again from the beginning, but I want you guys to only focus on this leg right here, all right, until it goes all the way up, or after the V shape. And I guess I'll just, I'll play it through. So it comes through that kicking leg. Once I make this V right here, I want you to pay attention to this leg. It rotates all the way around. As I come around, it's gonna rotate. So you're not really gonna intentionally make this motion, but I'll draw it out for you guys as best as I can. It's gonna be it's gonna come around like this. And that's gonna be your hip motion. And then you're gonna do the same thing on the other side, but the opposite. If you don't have a flair yet, I would focus on just the things I was talking about earlier, like your landing, your hand positions and all that stuff before. And this is mostly for cleaning up your flares. If you want higher hips, or if you want like more even looking flares, or if you want to get even more multiple flares, these will definitely help you. But if you're just trying to get one flare, two or three flares, then I would definitely not really worry about the toe pointing until you really get into the weeds about, trying to get higher hips in your flares.